The morning sun filtered through the blinds of room 207 at Fairview Middle School, a small-town cornerstone in Oregon's rolling hills, where the echoes of a fading industrial past mingled with the chatter of eighth graders. It was Wednesday, 8:47 a.m., and Emma Sullivan, 42, stood at the front of her history class, her auburn hair pulled into a loose bun, her khaki blazer slightly wrinkled from a rushed morning. Her voice, warm but firm, guided the students through a lesson on the Cold War, while paintbrushes and sketch pads littered the desks, a nod to her love for art-infused teaching. Across the room, Jake Ramsey, 34, leaned against the wall, his short blonde hair catching the light, his police uniform crisp but his eyes heavy with the weight of a case that never closed. His father's unsolved disappearance, a military man lost to history. Beside him sat Shadow, a German shepherd with a glossy black and tan coat, his ears perked, his gaze steady, a retired K-9 whose bomb-sniffing days were supposedly behind him. The room buzzed with the usual chaos of 13-year-olds. Sophie Carter, a bright-eyed girl with curly brown hair and a faded denim jacket, giggled with her friend over a half-finished sketch of a rocket. Paint splattered the tables and the air smelled of acrylics and teenage energy. Shadow, part of Fairview's new K-9 safety program, was a classroom favorite, often swarmed for pets or tricks. But today, something was off. Jake noticed it first, a subtle shift in Shadow's posture, his head tilting toward the back wall, where a massive painting hung, its dark hues dominating the room. The artwork, an American flag tattered against a stormy sky, with shadowed soldiers fading into a barren field, had always unnerved the kids. Emma called it a piece of history, a gift from her father, Henry Walsh, a military man she barely spoke of. "Focus, guys," Emma said, clapping her hands. "The Cold War wasn't just spies and missiles, it shaped lives." Sophie raised her hand, her voice curious. "Like secret experiments and stuff?" Emma smiled. But before she could answer, Shadow stood, his nails clicking on the tile. Jake straightened, his hand brushing the leash. "Shadow, easy," he murmured, but the dog's low growl cut through the room, sharp and urgent. Every head turned. Shadow's eyes locked on the painting, his body tense, his hackles rising. "What's with him?" Sophie whispered, her sketch forgotten. Emma stepped forward, her voice calm but uncertain. "Jake, is he okay?" Jake's brow furrowed, his training kicking in. "He's sensing something." But before he could move, Shadow bolted, his growl exploding into a bark that rattled the windows. He lunged at the painting, jaws snapping, and tore into the canvas with a ferocity that sent students screaming. Paint cans toppled, brushes hit the floor, and Sophie ducked under her desk, her phone already recording. Emma froze, her hand over her mouth, as Shadow ripped the canvas apart, shreds of the flag and soldiers falling like confetti. Jake rushed forward, grabbing Shadow's harness, but the dog's teeth clamped onto the bottom edge, pulling until a metallic groan echoed through the room. The class fell silent, the only sound Shadow's panting and the creak of something impossible. Behind the torn painting, embedded in the wall, was a rusted steel handle, glinting under the fluorescent lights. Jake's breath caught, his grip tightening on Shadow's leash. "What the hell?" he muttered, stepping closer. The handle wasn't part of the drywall, it was bolted into a hidden panel, seamless with the wall. Emma's voice trembled, her eyes wide. That's not supposed to be there." "That painting's been in my family forever. My dad gave it to me." Sophie peeked from under her desk, her voice a mix of fear and awe. "Miss Sullivan, what's behind it?" Jake's radio crackled, but he ignored it, his eyes on the handle. "Emma, you're sure you didn't know about this?" Emma shook her head, her face pale. "I swear, Jake." "I thought it was just art." Shadow whined, his nose pressed to the panel, his tail rigid. Jake's gut twisted. He'd seen Shadow like this before, in training, when he'd sniffed out danger no one else could. "Everybody out," he said, his voice sharp. "Now." The students scrambled, Sophie lingering to snap another photo, her thumbs already typing a caption for her group chat. Emma hesitated, her voice breaking. "Jake, my dad, he was in the military. He never talked about his work. Could this be his?" Jake didn't answer, his hand on his holster, his mind racing. Fairview wasn't just a sleepy town. It had been a military hub decades ago, its old Air Force buildings repurposed into schools. Shadow's bark hadn't been random. Something was buried here, and it wasn't just a door. As the classroom emptied, the PA system crackled, Principal Laura Bennett's voice booming, "All classes, locked down." "This is not a drill." Jake crouched beside Shadow, his voice low. "What did you find, boy?" The dog's eyes stayed fixed on the handle, a soft growl rumbling in his throat. Emma's hand shook as she touched the torn canvas, her voice barely audible. "If my dad hid this, what was he hiding from me?" But as Jake reached for the handle, his radio hissed to life, a distorted voice cutting through the static. "You shouldn't have let the dog dig." His blood ran cold, Shadow's growl spiking. Someone was watching, someone who knew what lay behind that wall. And in that moment, Jake realized this wasn't just a discovery. It was the start of a reckoning that would shake Fairview to its core. The fluorescent lights of room 207 buzzed overhead, casting stark shadows across Fairview Middle School's history classroom, where the air still crackled with the shock of Shadow's attack on the painting. The torn canvas, once a brooding depiction of a tattered American flag, lay in shreds on the tile floor, its soldiers' shadows now just scraps of color. Jake Ramsey, 34, stood by the exposed steel door, his short blonde hair damp with sweat, his police uniform taut across his shoulders as he gripped Shadow's leash. The German shepherd's black and tan coat glistened under the lights, his bloodied paw smearing faint red on the floor, his amber eyes locked on the rusted handle embedded in the wall. Emma Sullivan, 42, hovered nearby, her auburn hair slipping from its bun, her khaki blazer crumpled as she clutched a piece of the ruined painting, her face pale with disbelief. Sophie Carter, 13, lingered by the door, her curly brown hair framing wide eyes, her denim jacket slung over one shoulder, her phone still buzzing with notifications from the photo she'd posted. The classroom was empty now. The other students herded to the cafeteria under Principal Laura Bennett's lockdown orders. The PA system's warning echoed in Jake's mind, but it was the distorted voice on his radio, "You shouldn't have let the dog dig," that sent a chill down his spine. Shadow's low growl hadn't stopped, a steady rumble that vibrated through the room. "Jake, we can't just open it," Emma said, her voice tight, her fingers tracing the canvas's frayed edge. "That painting, my dad gave it to me. He said it was his last mission." "If there's something behind this wall, it's his secret." Jake's jaw clenched, his hand hovering over the handle. "Emma, Shadow doesn't react like this for nothing. He's trained to find threats, bombs, chemicals, you name it. Whatever's back there, it's not just art." Sophie stepped closer, her voice a mix of fear and excitement. "What if it's like a spy thing, like in those Cold War movies, Ms. Sullivan shows us?" Jake shot her a look, his voice firm. "Sophie, stay back. This isn't a game." But Sophie's eyes gleamed, her phone still in hand. "I'm not leaving. Shadow knew something was wrong. I trust him." Emma's gaze flicked to Sophie, then back to the door, her voice trembling. "Jake, my dad, Henry Walsh, he was military intelligence. He never talked about his work, but he'd get this look sometimes, like he was carrying a ghost. If he hid this, It's because he didn't want it found. Jake's mind raced, memories of his own father, a military man lost to a classified mission, stirring unease. Fairview's history as an old Air Force hub wasn't news, but a hidden door in a middle school. That was something else. "We need to know," he said, his voice low. "For Shadow, for your dad, for all of us." He pulled the handle, the steel groaning as the door inched open, releasing a cold, musty gust that smelled of rust and time. Shadow's growl spiked, his body tensing as Jake's flashlight swept the darkness. Beyond the door was a small chamber, no bigger than a closet, its walls lined with rusted file cabinets and shelves stacked with dusty reels of magnetic tape. A single flickering bulb hung from the ceiling, casting jagged shadows. "Jesus," Jake muttered, stepping inside, Shadow at his heels. Emma followed, her breath catching, while Sophie peeked from the doorway, her phone recording again. The room felt like a tomb, untouched for decades. Jake's light caught a faded label on a tape reel, Project Silent Canvas, 1976. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "That's my dad's handwriting." She reached for a file cabinet, her hands shaking, but Jake grabbed her wrist. "Wait. We don't know what's in here. Could be hazardous." Shadow whined, his nose twitching, and pawed at a cabinet, his claws scraping metal. Jake opened it, revealing folders stamped "Confidential, Deputy of Defense." One was labeled Subject 12, with a grainy photo clipped to it. A girl, maybe 10, with auburn hair, eerily like a young Emma. Emma gasped, stumbling back, her voice breaking. That's me." Jake's heart pounded, his eyes meeting hers. "Emma, what the hell was your dad involved in?" Before she could answer, Sophie's voice cut through, sharp and urgent. "Guys, my phone, it's going crazy." She held it up, her screen flooded with notifications, her post now viral with comments like, "Secret room at Fairview," and "What's the dog hiding?" But one message from an anonymous number made Jake's blood run cold. "Stop now, or you'll regret it." "Sophie, turn that off," Jake snapped, his hand on his radio, ready to call for backup. But Shadow's sudden bark stopped him, the dog's teeth bared at the chamber's far wall, where a faint seam suggested another hidden panel. Jake's flashlight traced it, revealing a second handle, smaller, locked with a rusted padlock. "There's more," he said, his voice grim. Emma's eyes filled with tears, her voice raw. "Jake, if that's me in those files, what did my dad do to me?" "What didn't I know?" Jake's radio crackled again, the same distorted voice hissing, "You're opening a grave." Shadow's growl turned feral, his body poised to lunge. Jake's pulse raced. Someone was watching, someone who knew this room's secrets. He looked at Emma, her face a mix of fear and determination, then at Sophie, her defiance masking her fear. "We're in this now," he said, his voice steady despite the dread. "Shadow started it. We finish it." But as he reached for the second handle, a loud thud echoed from the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots. Whoever was behind this wasn't just watching, they were coming. The air in room 207 at Fairview Middle School hung thick with dust and dread, the fluorescent lights flickering as if struggling to illuminate the truth buried within the hidden chamber. Jake Ramsey, 34, stood at the threshold of the steel door, his short blonde hair catching the dim glow, his police uniform creased from the chaos of Shadow's attack on the painting. The German Shepherd, Shadow, sat rigid beside him, his black and tan coat matted with classroom grime, his bloodied paw leaving faint smears on the tile, his amber eyes fixed on the rusted file cabinets lining the secret room. Emma Sullivan, 42, clutched a folder labeled Subject 12, her auburn hair loose and tangled, her khaki blazer slipping off one shoulder as she stared at the grainy photo of a young girl, herself, she was certain, clipped to the file. Sophie Carter, 13, hovered near the doorway, her curly brown hair framing a face torn between fear and fascination, her denim jacket clutched in her hands, her phone now dark after the anonymous threat. "Stop now, or you'll regret it." The torn painting, a haunting depiction of a tattered American flag and shadowed soldiers, lay in ruins on the floor, its secrets exposed by Shadow's ferocity. The chamber beyond the door, a relic of Fairview's military past, smelled of rust and antiseptic, its shelves stacked with magnetic tape reels and folders stamped "Confidential, Depth of Defense." Jake's radio crackled faintly, the distorted voice from minutes ago, "You're opening a grave," still echoing in his mind. The thud of boots in the hallway had stopped, but the silence felt heavier, as if the school itself was holding its breath. Principal Laura Bennett, 50, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun, her navy blazer crisp despite the lockdown, appeared at the door, her voice sharp but shaken. "Jake, what's going on? Parents are calling."
"Sophie's post is all over the internet. We need to contain this." Jake's jaw tightened, his hand resting on Shadow's harness. "Laura, this isn't a gas leak or a prank."
Shadow found a hidden room, military files, tapes, something called Project Silent Canvas. Emma's dad was involved. Emma's voice broke, her eyes locked on the photo of her younger self.
"This can't be me, Jake."
"I grew up in Portland, went to art school. I'd remember, wouldn't I?" Sophie stepped closer, her voice bold despite her trembling hands. "Ms. Sullivan, what if you weren't supposed to remember, like brainwashing or something? I saw a documentary." "Sophie, enough," Laura snapped, but her eyes softened, betraying her own unease. Fairview, once a Cold War Air Force hub, had repurposed its old buildings into schools in the 80s, but rumors of buried secrets, tunnels, classified projects had always lingered. Jake crouched beside a file cabinet, pulling out a reel labeled 1976, Session 12. The handwriting matched the one Emma had recognized as her father's, Henry Walsh, a military intelligence officer whose silence had haunted her childhood. "We need answers," Jake said, his voice low, his own father's unsolved disappearance, a military mystery, stirring memories he'd tried to bury. "Shadow didn't tear that painting for fun. He's telling us something." Emma's hands shook as she opened the Subject 12 folder, revealing typed reports. Cognitive suppression successful. Visual triggers embedded in artwork. Subject shows no recall of primary conditioning. Her breath hitched, her voice a whisper. "They did something to me, Jake. My dad. He was part of this." Sophie's eyes widened, her voice urgent. "What if it's still happening? That text I got, it wasn't a joke. Someone knows we're here." Jake's gaze snapped to her, his training kicking in. "Sophie, who else saw you post that photo?" She hesitated, her face paling. "Just my group chat. But it's public now. Thousands of likes." Laura's voice cut through, strained but authoritative. "We're calling the sheriff, Jake. This is beyond us." But Shadow's sudden growl stopped her. The dog's ears pricked, his body tensing as he faced the chamber's far wall, where a second, smaller handle gleamed behind a stack of tapes. Jake's flashlight swept over it, revealing a faint seam in the steel, a hidden panel within the hidden room. "There's more," he said, his pulse racing. Emma's voice cracked, her eyes brimming with tears. "If my dad built this, what else did he hide? What else don't I know about myself?" Jake approached the panel, Shadow at his side, but a sharp crack echoed from the hallway, a door slamming, followed by the murmur of voices. He killed his flashlight, motioning for silence. Laura whispered, her voice trembling. "That's not the sheriff. They're not due for another hour." Sophie clutched her phone, her voice barely audible. "What if it's them?" The ones who sent the text. Jake's hand went to his holster, his voice low but firm. Stay here, I'm checking it out. Emma grabbed his arm, her eyes pleading. Jake, don't leave us. If this is about my dad, it's about me too. But Shadow's growl deepened, his nose twitching as he pawed at the second handle, his claws scraping metal. Jake's gut screamed danger, but the dog's insistence was undeniable. All right, boy, he muttered, prying at the panel with a crowbar from the classroom. The steel groaned, revealing a narrow shaft descending into darkness. A rusted ladder bolted to the wall. The air from below was colder, sharper, carrying a faint chemical tang. Jake's light caught something at the ladder's base, a faded sign, barely legible. Project Silent Canvas, Sub-Level 1. Emma's voice was raw, her hands clutching the Subject 12 folder. Jake, I'm coming with you. If that's my past down there, I need to know. Laura stepped forward, her voice firm despite her fear. Emma, you're a teacher, not a cop. Let Jake handle this. But Emma's eyes blazed, her voice fierce. Laura, I've spent my life teaching kids to face history. This is mine. I'm not running. Sophie's voice piped up, defiant. I'm coming too. Shadow trusts me. Jake shook his head, his voice sharp. Sophie, you're staying with Laura. That's an order. Before they could argue, a new sound froze them, a low, mechanical hum from the hallway, like a generator kicking to life. Shadow's bark exploded, echoing through the chamber, and Jake's radio hissed again, the distorted voice clearer now. You're too close, Ramsey. Back off, or the girl pays. Jake's blood ran cold, his eyes snapping to Sophie, who gasped, her phone slipping from her hand. They mean me, she whispered, her voice trembling. Laura pulled her close, her voice shaking. Jake, what have we stumbled into? Jake's mind raced, the weight of his father's lost case pressing on him. Fairview's military past wasn't just history, it was alive, and someone was desperate to keep it buried. He looked at Shadow, whose growl was unrelenting, then at Emma, her face set with resolve. We're opening a door to hell, he said, his voice steady despite the dread. But Shadow started this, and I'm not letting him down. As he gripped the ladder, ready to descend, a shadow moved in the hallway, swift and silent, followed by a faint click, like a camera shutter. Someone wasn't just watching. They were documenting every move, and the truth behind that painting was about to unravel Fairview's soul. The hidden chamber beneath room 207 at Fairview Middle School felt like a crypt, its rusted file cabinets and tape reels casting jagged shadows under the flickering bulb. Jake Ramsey, 34, stood at the edge of the narrow shaft, revealed by the second hidden panel, his short blonde hair damp with sweat, his police uniform smudged with dust. His flashlight beam traced the rusted ladder descending into darkness, the faded sign at its base, Project Silent Canvas, Sub-Level 1, burning in his mind. Shadow, the German shepherd, growled softly, his black and tan coat bristling, his bloodied paw leaving faint marks on the steel floor, his amber eyes fixed on the shaft. Emma Sullivan, 42, clutched the Subject 12 folder, her auburn hair falling loose, her khaki blazer torn at the sleeve, her face pale as she grappled with the photo of her younger self, a ghost from a past she couldn't recall. Sophie Carter, 13, stood by Principal Laura Bennett, her curly brown hair framing wide, defiant eyes, her denim jacket slung over her arm, her phone now off after the chilling text. Back off, or the girl pays. The air was heavy with the scent of antiseptic and decay, the hum of a distant generator echoing from the hallway where footsteps had faded moments ago. Jake's radio sat silent, but the distorted voice's threat lingered, tying his stomach in knots. Laura, 50, her gray hair tight in a bun, her navy blazer creased, gripped Sophie's shoulder, her voice strained. Jake, we need the sheriff. This is out of control. Jake's jaw clenched, his hand on Shadow's harness. Laura, whoever's watching us knows we're here. Calling backup might tip them off. Emma's voice trembled, her eyes locked on the ladder. If that's my past down there, Jake, I have to know. I can't live wondering what my dad did to me. Sophie's voice cut through, bold but shaky. Miss Sullivan, what if it's dangerous? That text, it was about me. Jake turned, his voice firm but gentle. Sophie, you're staying with Laura. No arguments. Sophie's eyes blazed, her hands balling into fists. Shadow trusts me, Jake. I'm not just some kid. I saw what he did to that painting. I'm part of this. Laura pulled her back, her voice cracking. Sophie, you're brave, but this isn't your fight. But Sophie's gaze held Jake's, a spark of courage that reminded him of his own stubborn resolve, forged by his father's unsolved disappearance. Jake looked at Shadow, whose growl deepened, his nose twitching toward the shaft. All right, Emma, you're with me, he said, his voice steady despite the dread gnawing at him. Laura, keep Sophie safe. If you hear anything, radio me. Emma nodded, her hands shaking as she tucked the folder into her blazer. I'm ready, she whispered, though her eyes betrayed her fear. Jake clipped his flashlight to his belt, his hand brushing his holster, and started down the ladder, Shadow scrambling after him, claws clanging on the rungs. Emma followed, her breath uneven, the cold air from below biting her skin. The shaft dropped 10 feet, opening into a narrow corridor lined with cracked linoleum tiles, the walls stained with mildew. The chemical tang was stronger here, mingled with a faint metallic scent. Jake's light swept over a rusted door at the corridor's end, its surface etched with faint scratches, as if someone had clawed at it. Shadow's hackles rose, his growl echoing off the walls. This place hasn't been touched in decades, Jake said, his voice low. Emma's voice was barely audible. It feels familiar. Like I've been here before. Her words sent a chill through Jake, his father's cryptic letters about classified work flashing in his mind. They reached the door, its handle cold and unyielding. Shadow pawed at it, whining, and Jake forced it open, the hinges screaming. Beyond was a small, sterile room, its walls lined with shelves of tape reels and file boxes, a dusty reel-to-reel recorder on a metal table, a faded map hung on the wall showing Fairview's school grounds with red lines marking tunnels to an old power plant nearby. Jake's pulse quickened. This wasn't just storage, he said, his voice tight. This was operational. Emma's flashlight caught a file box labeled Project Silent Canvas, Visual Triggers, and she opened it, revealing sketches of the painting Shadow had destroyed, swirling grays, reds, and sepia tones, annotated with notes, Induce Recall Suppression. Emma's voice broke, her hands trembling. They used art to control me. My dad's painting? Jake's eyes met hers, his voice soft but urgent. Emma, we're going to figure this out. You're not alone in this. But Shadow's sudden bark cut through, sharp and frantic, his nose pressed to a shelf. Jake moved it aside, revealing a hidden compartment with a single tape reel labeled Session 12, 1976, H. Walsh. Emma's breath caught, her voice raw. That's him. My dad. Jake loaded the tape into the recorder, his hand steady despite the weight of what they might hear. The machine whirred, and a gravelly voice filled the room. Henry Walsh, cold and precise. Subject 12, cycle reset complete, memory suppression holding. Visual trigger embedded in canvas. Emma sank to her knees, tears streaming. He did this to me, Jake. My own dad. Jake crouched beside her, his voice thick with empathy. Emma, he might have been following orders. We don't know the whole story yet. But the tape continued, Henry's voice faltering. If she remembers, God help us. The recording cut to static, and Shadow's growl spiked, his body tensing as he faced the door. Jake's flashlight swept the corridor, catching a glint. a small, blinking red light, a camera lens embedded in the wall. "We're being watched," he whispered, his heart pounding. Before they could move, the generator's hum surged and the door slammed shut, the lock clicking with a heavy thud. Emma's voice rose, panicked. "Jake, we're trapped!" Shadow barked furiously, lunging at the door, his claws scraping metal. Jake's radio crackled, the distorted voice now chillingly clear. "You found her file, Ramsey. Now you're part of the experiment." Jake's blood froze, his mind racing. Someone wasn't just guarding this secret. They were continuing it. He grabbed the reel, stuffing it into his jacket, and pried at the door with his crowbar, his voice fierce. "Emma, stay with me. We're getting out." But as the door groaned open, a new shock hit. Sophie stood in the corridor, her face pale, her phone clutched in her hand. "Sophie, what the hell are you doing here?" Jake shouted, his voice a mix of anger and fear. Sophie's voice trembled, her eyes wide. "Laura got a call. Someone's in the school. They mentioned Subject 12. I had to warn you." Emma's hand flew to her mouth, her voice breaking. "They're after me, aren't they?" Shadow's growl turned savage, his body poised between Sophie and the darkness beyond, where the sound of boots echoed again, closer now. Jake's flashlight caught a shadow moving at the corridor's end, and in that moment, he knew the past wasn't just buried, it was hunting them. The air in the underground chamber beneath Fairview Middle School was thick with the stench of mildew and metal, the cracked linoleum floor cold under Jake Ramsey's boots. The 34-year-old police officer stood in the dim glow of his flashlight, his short blonde hair matted with sweat, his police uniform streaked with dust from the hidden corridor. Shadow, the German shepherd, growled low, his black and tan coat bristling, his bloodied paw leaving faint smears as he paced before a rusted door that had just slammed shut, trapping them. Emma Sullivan, 42, leaned against the wall, her auburn hair tangled, her khaki blazer torn, her hands clutching the Subject 12 folder, her face pale as the tape reel's words. Her father, Henry Walsh's voice ordering her memory suppression, echoed in her mind. Sophie Carter, 13, stood wide-eyed, her curly brown hair framing a face caught between fear and defiance, her denim jacket clutched tightly, her warning about intruders in the school still ringing. The flickering bulb overhead buzzed, casting jagged shadows across shelves of tape reels and file boxes labeled Project Silent Canvas. The map on the wall, marking tunnels to an old power plant, loomed like a threat. Jake's radio crackled faintly, the distorted voice's last words. "Now you're part of the experiment," chilling his blood. Shadow's barks echoed, his claws scraping the locked door. But the hum of the generator outside had spiked, and the camera's red light blinked relentlessly from the wall. "Jake, we're sitting ducks," Emma said, her voice raw, her eyes darting to the door. "If they're after me, what do they want?" Jake's jaw clenched, his hand on his holster. "They want this buried, Emma. Your dad's project, whatever it was, it's still alive." Sophie's voice trembled, her phone dark in her hand. "They knew I was coming down here. That text. It's like they're watching every move." Jake's eyes snapped to her, his voice sharp but steady. "Sophie, you shouldn't be here." "Where's Laura?" Sophie's chin lifted, her voice fierce despite her fear. "She's with the sheriff now, but I had to warn you. They mentioned Subject 12. Miss Sullivan, they're not just after the files." Emma's breath hitched, her hands shaking as she gripped the folder. "Jake, I don't remember anything, but I feel it. Like I've been here, in this room, as a kid. What did my dad do to me?" Jake's heart ached, his own father's military secrets a shadow over his life. "We're getting answers," he said, his voice firm. He grabbed the crowbar, prying at the door, but a sudden deafening bang shook the chamber, dust raining from the ceiling. Shadow's barks turned frantic, and a low, grinding noise erupted from the corridor beyond. A mechanism, old but alive, shifting the walls. "Get back!" Jake shouted, pulling Emma and Sophie behind a file cabinet. The door groaned, but it wasn't opening. It was sinking, revealing a hidden passage lined with flickering emergency lights, leading deeper underground. The air grew colder, carrying a sharp chemical tang. Shadow bolted toward the passage, his growl unrelenting, and Jake's flashlight caught a new sign. Sublevel 2, conditioning. Emma's voice broke, her eyes wide. Conditioning? Jake, they weren't just hiding files. They were doing something to people, to me. Jake's pulse raced, the map's tunnel to the power plant flashing in his mind. This wasn't just a Cold War relic, he said, his voice low. It's a lab. Sophie's voice was a whisper, her eyes on Shadow. He knew. That's why he tore the painting. Jake nodded, his hand on Shadow's harness. Stay close, we're following him. They moved into the passage, the walls narrowing, the lights casting eerie flickers. Shadow led, his nose low, pausing at a rusted hatch covered in scratch marks, as if someone had tried to escape. Jake forced it open, revealing a larger chamber, a sterile room with a single chair bolted to the floor, surrounded by shattered monitors and a dusty control panel. A faded photo taped to the panel showed a young Emma, smiling, with Henry Walsh, his face stern. Emma froze, tears streaming. That's us. I don't remember this. How can I not remember? Jake's voice was soft but urgent, his hand on her shoulder. Emma, you were a kid. Whatever they did, it wasn't your fault. But Sophie's gasp cut through, her flashlight landing on a wall covered in childlike drawings, crudely sketched figures, dogs, and a gate with the words, "I want to go home," scratched beside them. Ms. Sullivan, were there others? Sophie asked, her voice trembling. Emma's voice was barely audible. I don't know, but I think so. Shadow's sudden bark jolted them, his body tensing as he faced the control panel. Jake approached, his light catching a hidden drawer. Inside was a single tape labeled Emergency Protocol 1977 H. Walsh. He loaded it into a nearby recorder, his hand steady despite the dread. Henry's voice crackled through. If Subject 12 recalls, terminate the project. Visual triggers must be destroyed. No loose ends. The tape ended with a child's scream, sharp and haunting, and Emma collapsed, sobbing. That was me, she whispered. He was ready to kill me. Jake's blood ran cold, but before he could speak, the generator's hum surged and the chamber shook, a low explosion rumbling from the tunnel above. Dust and debris rained down, and Shadow's barks turned savage, his body shielding Sophie as the lights flickered out. Jake's flashlight caught a figure at the passage's entrance, a woman, 38, with short black hair and a dark FBI jacket, her badge glinting. Agent Sarah Coleman. Ramsey, Sullivan, step away from the tapes, she said, her voice cold, her hand on her holster. Jake's heart stopped, the twist hitting like a punch. Coleman, you're with the sheriff. How'd you get here so fast? Coleman's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp. I've been tracking Silent Canvas for years. You're in over your head. Emma's voice rose, raw with betrayal. Tracking it or covering it up? You knew about my dad, didn't you? Coleman's face tightened, but Shadow's growl spiked, his teeth bared, and Jake stepped forward, his voice fierce. You sent those texts, didn't you, to scare us off? Coleman's hand twitched, but the explosion's echo faded, replaced by shouts from above, sheriff's deputies, Laura's voice calling. Coleman hesitated, then backed away, vanishing into the dark. Jake's chest heaved, his eyes on Emma and Sophie. We're not done,
he said, grabbing the tape. Shadow's leading us to the truth, and I'm not stopping now. But as they climbed back toward the surface, Sophie's whisper chilled him. What if she's not the only one watching? Shadow's whine filled the air, and Jake knew the past was closing in, ready to bury them all. The underground chamber beneath Fairview Middle School pulsed with a faint, mechanical hum, its cracked linoleum floor littered with dust and debris from the recent explosion. Jake Ramsey, 34, stood in the sterile room, his short blonde hair slick with sweat, his police uniform torn at the sleeve, his flashlight casting stark shadows across the bolted chair and shattered monitors. Shadow, the German shepherd, paced restlessly, his black and tan coat streaked with grime, his bloodied paw leaving faint smears, his amber eyes locked on the control panel where a tape reel labeled Emergency Protocol, 1977, H. Walsh, had just played Emma Sullivan's childhood scream. Emma, 42, leaned against the wall, her auburn hair loose, her khaki blazer crumpled, her face pale as she clutched the Subject 12 folder, grappling with the revelation that her father, Henry Walsh, had suppressed her memories. Sophie Carter, 13, stood close, her curly brown hair framing wide, frightened eyes, her denim jacket clutched tightly, her warning about Agent Sarah Coleman's sudden appearance still ringing. The childlike drawings on the wall, "I want to go home," loomed like ghosts, and the map to the old power plant hinted at deeper secrets. Jake's radio was silent, but Coleman's cryptic words, "I've been tracking silent canvas for years," and her swift retreat into the dark fueled his suspicion. The sheriff's shouts echoed from the tunnel above, but the blinking camera lens in the wall kept Jake's nerves on edge. "Emma, we need to move," he said, his voice low but urgent, pocketing the tape. Coleman's not working alone, and that explosion wasn't an accident. Emma's voice trembled, her eyes brimming with tears. "Jake, my dad, he was ready to kill me to keep this quiet. What kind of father does that?" Jake's heart ached. His own father's military disappearance a raw wound. "We don't know the whole story," he said, his voice soft but firm. "But Shadow's leading us to it. We're not giving up." Sophie's voice cut through, shaky but defiant. "Ms. Sullivan, you're stronger than they thought. That's why they're scared." Emma managed a faint smile, her hand brushing Sophie's shoulder. "You're too brave for your own good, kid." Shadow's sudden whine pulled their attention, his nose pressed to a rusted file box labeled Project Silent Canvas, Phase 2. Jake pried it open, revealing a stack of yellowed documents and a small, locked journal, its cover embossed with HW. Emma's breath caught. "That's his," she whispered, her hands shaking as she took it. Jake broke the lock, revealing pages of Henry's tight script. Subject 12 shows resistance, visual triggers failing. Senator Caldwell demands results, threatens funding cut. Emma's voice cracked, reading aloud. "Caldwell, he was Dad's commanding officer. I met him once, I think." Jake's pulse quickened, the name sparking a memory of his father's letters mentioning a Caldwell in classified ops. "He's not just military," Jake said, his voice grim. "Caldwell's a senator now, big player in D.C. "If he funded this..." Sophie's eyes widened, her voice urgent. "What if he's the one sending those texts, trying to stop us?" Before Jake could answer, Shadow growled, his hackles rising as he faced the passage. The sheriff's shouts grew closer, but a new sound, a faint rhythmic tapping, came from the walls like something moving inside them. "Stay behind me," Jake said, his hand on his holster, flashlight sweeping the passage. The tapping stopped, replaced by a low hiss, and a cloud of acrid smoke poured from a vent, stinging their eyes. "Gas!" Jake shouted, pulling his shirt over his mouth. Shadow barked furiously.
lunging at the vent, his claws scraping metal. Emma coughed, her voice panicked.
"Jake, they're trying to kill us!" Sophie grabbed her hand, her voice fierce. "We're not dying down here. Shadow won't let us." Jake's training kicked in, his eyes scanning for an exit.
Shadow's barks led him to a rusted grate in the floor, barely visible under debris. He kicked it open, revealing a narrow tunnel, its walls slick with moss, leading toward the power plant. "Go!" he yelled, helping Emma and Sophie through. Shadow leapt in, his growl echoing as Jake followed, the smoke thickening behind them. The tunnel was claustrophobic, the air damp and heavy, but Shadow moved with purpose, his nose guiding them through the dark. They emerged in a larger chamber, its walls lined with old circuit boards and a single dusty console. A faded photo taped to the console showed Henry Walsh with a young girl, not Emma, but eerily similar, with dark curls. Scrawled beneath it, Subject 13, terminated. Emma's voice broke, her hands trembling. There was another girl. Jake. What did they do to her? Jake's flashlight caught a reel in the console, labeled Final Session 1978 Caldwell. He loaded it, his heart pounding, and a new voice filled the room. Senator Caldwell, cold and commanding. Subject 13 resisted. Termination authorized. Walsh, destroy the triggers. No one can know. The tape cut off, and Sophie's gasp echoed. "They killed her," she whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "And they're still hiding it." Jake's blood ran cold, but Shadow's sudden bark snapped him back. The dog's teeth bared at the tunnel's entrance. A shadow moved. Coleman, her FBI badge glinting, her gun raised. "You're digging too deep, Ramsey," she said, her voice icy. But the twist hit like a thunderbolt. Behind her stood Principal Laura Bennett, her navy blazer pristine, her face unreadable, holding a small device, a remote trigger. "Laura?" Jake's voice was thick with shock. "You're with her?" Laura's voice was calm, almost regretful. "I didn't want this, Jake, but Caldwell's reach is long. He owns Fairview." Emma's voice rose, raw with betrayal. "You knew about this place." "About me?" Laura's eyes flickered, but Coleman stepped forward, her gun steady. "Hand over the tapes, or we end this now." Shadow's growl turned feral. His body coiled, and Jake's hand tightened on his holster. "You're not burying this," he said, his voice fierce. "Shadow started it, and we're finishing it. For Emma, for that girl, for every kid you monsters hurt." As the sheriff's shouts grew louder above, Jake knew they were out of time, but Shadow's unwavering stance gave him hope. The truth was breaking free, and no one, not Coleman, not Laura, not Caldwell, could stop it now. The damp, moss-slick tunnel beneath Fairview Middle School echoed with the distant shouts of sheriff's deputies, but the air in the underground chamber was heavy with betrayal. Jake Ramsey, 34, stood poised, his short blonde hair clinging to his forehead, his police uniform torn and dusty, his hand steady on his holster. Shadow, the German shepherd, growled low, his black and tan coat bristling, his bloodied paw planted firmly before Jake, amber eyes locked on Agent Sarah Coleman and Principal Laura Bennett. Coleman, 38, her short black hair framing a cold stare, held her gun level, her FBI badge glinting. Laura, 50, her gray hair still tightly bunned, clutched a remote trigger, her navy blazer pristine despite the chaos. Emma Sullivan, 42, gripped the Subject 12 folder, her auburn hair loose, her khaki blazer stained, her face etched with shock from the tape revealing her father, Henry Walsh, and Senator Caldwell's experiments. Sophie Carter, 13, stood close, her curly brown hair framing wide, defiant eyes, her denim jacket crumpled in her hands, the photo of Subject 13 burning in her mind. The chamber's shattered monitors and childlike drawings, "I want to go home," loomed like accusations, the reel labeled Final Session, 1978, Caldwell, silent but damning. Jake's pulse raced. Laura's admission. Caldwell owns Fairview, a knife to his trust. Laura, you knew about this place. Emma's voice cracked, raw with hurt. You let me teach here knowing what they did to me? Laura's face tightened, her voice low but unsteady. Emma, I had no choice. Caldwell's power. It's everywhere. I thought keeping quiet protected the kids. Jake's voice was steel, his eyes on Coleman's gun. Protected them? You're protecting a monster who experimented on children. Sophie's voice shook, fierce despite her fear. You let them kill that other girl. Subject 13. She was just like Ms. Sullivan. Coleman's eyes narrowed, her voice sharp. You're in over your head, Ramsey. Hand over the tapes, or this ends badly. Shadow's growl deepened, his body coiled, ready to lunge. Jake's hand hovered over his weapon, his voice steady. You're not burying this, Coleman. Shadow started it, and we're ending it. The deputy's shouts grew louder, boots echoing in the tunnel above, but a faint click broke the standoff. Laura's thumb twitching on the remote trigger. Jake's heart stopped, his voice urgent. Laura, what does that do? Her eyes flickered with regret, her voice barely a whisper. It seals the chamber, Caldwell's orders, no evidence, no witnesses. Emma's voice rose, desperate. Laura, you're one of us. You can't do this. Laura's hand shook, her voice breaking. I'm sorry, Emma, I've got family too. Before Jake could react, Shadow lunged, a blur of fur and fury, knocking the remote from Laura's hand. It clattered to the floor, and Sophie dove for it, her small hands snatching it as Coleman fired, the shot grazing Jake's arm. He grunted, diving behind the console, pulling Emma with him. Stay down, he shouted, drawing his gun. Shadow tackled Coleman, his teeth sinking into her sleeve, dragging her to the ground. Laura froze, her face crumpling, and Sophie held the trigger aloft, her voice fierce. I'm not letting you trap us. The deputy's shouts were close now, flashlights piercing the tunnel's darkness. Jake fired a warning shot, pinning Coleman as Shadow held her down. Drop the gun, Coleman, he roared, blood seeping through his sleeve. Coleman's eyes blazed, but she released her weapon, her voice bitter. You're signing your own death warrant, Ramsey. Caldwell's untouchable. Jake zip-tied her wrists, his chest heaving, his eyes on Laura. You're done too, Laura. Step back. Emma staggered to her feet, tears streaming, her voice raw. Why, Laura? I trusted you. Laura's voice was a whisper, her eyes wet. I thought I was protecting Fairview. I didn't know about you, Emma. Not until today. Sophie's voice cut through, sharp and angry. You knew enough. You let this happen, Shadow whined, limping back to Jake, his flank scratched from the scuffle, but his eyes steady, guarding Sophie. Jake's flashlight swept the chamber, landing on a rusted locker hidden behind the console. Shadow's nose twitched, and he pawed at it, his growl soft but insistent. Jake pried it open, revealing a single file. Subject 13, Relocation Log, 1978. Inside was a photo of the dark-haired girl from the console, with a note in Henry's handwriting. Transferred to Southfield. Caldwell's orders. Forgive me. Emma's voice trembled, reading it aloud. Southfield. That's the old orphanage. She wasn't killed. She was moved. The twist hit like a shockwave. Jake's mind raced. His father's letters mentioning Southfield as a classified site. She might still be out there, he said, his voice tight. Sophie's eyes widened, her voice urgent. We have to find her, Jake, for Mr. Sullivan, for all of them. But Coleman's laugh, cold and mocking, cut through. You think Caldwell left loose ends? Subject 13's long gone, and you're next. The deputies burst into the chamber, weapons drawn, their lights blinding.
"Ramsey, stand down!" one shouted, but Jake held up his badge, his voice commanding. "Coleman's dirty! Arrest her!" "Bennett's complicit." Laura sank to her knees, sobbing, as the deputies cuffed Coleman. Emma clutched the file, her voice a whisper. "Jake, if she's alive, I need to know. I need to know who else my dad hurt." Jake's arm throbbed, but Shadow's steady presence grounded him. "We're not done," he said, his voice fierce, pocketing the file. "Shadow's got us this far. We'll find her." As the deputies led Coleman and Laura away, Sophie's voice was soft but resolute. "We're not just saving Ms. Sullivan, are we? We're saving Fairview." Jake nodded, his eyes on the tunnel above where the truth waited, sharper and deadlier than ever. The air in the underground chamber beneath Fairview Middle School was thick with dust and betrayal, the flickering emergency lights casting eerie shadows across the cracked linoleum. Jake Ramsey, 34, stood tense, his short blonde hair matted with sweat, his police uniform torn, blood seeping through a bandage on his arm from Agent Sarah Coleman's shot. Shadow, the German shepherd, growled low, his black and tan coat streaked with grime, his bloodied paw steady as he guarded Jake, amber eyes locked on the tunnel entrance where deputies had just hauled Coleman and Principal Laura Bennett away. Emma Sullivan, 42, clutched the Subject 13 file. Her auburn hair tangled, her khaki blazer ripped, her face raw with the revelation that her father, Henry Walsh, had relocated another girl in their experiments. Sophie Carter, 13, stood close, her curly brown hair framing wide, determined eyes, her denim jacket slung over her shoulder, the weight of their discoveries fueling her resolve. The chamber's childlike drawings and shattered monitors loomed like ghosts, the tape revealing Senator Caldwell's role in Project Silent Canvas echoing in Jake's mind. The file on Subject 13, hinting at her transfer to Southfield Orphanage, burned with possibility she might still be alive. Jake's radio crackled faintly, the deputies' voices fading, but the blinking camera lens in the wall kept his nerves taut. "Emma, we need that tape and file out of here," Jake said, his voice low but urgent, pocketing the reel. "Caldwell's got eyes everywhere." Emma's voice trembled, her eyes brimming. "Jake, if Subject 13 is out there, I need to find her." "My dad, he did this to us both." Sophie's voice was fierce, her hands clenched. "We're not letting Caldwell win, Ms. Sullivan." Shadow didn't tear that painting for nothing. Jake's heart ached, his own father's military secrets a shadow over his life. "We're close," he said, his voice steady, "but we've got to move fast." Shadow's sudden bark cut through, sharp and urgent, his nose twitching toward a rusted panel behind the console. Jake pried it open, revealing a small, locked safe, its surface scratched with faint etchings. H.W., 1978. Emma's breath caught. "Dad's initials," she whispered, her hands shaking as Jake broke the lock. Inside was a single photo, Henry Walsh with a young Emma and another girl, dark curls framing her face, and a note in Henry's handwriting. "Caldwell's orders override morality. Protect them both." Emma's voice broke. "He tried to save us, but he failed her." Before Jake could respond, the chamber's light surged, and a low rumble shook the walls, dust raining down. Shadow's growl turned feral, his body tensing as a hidden door slid open, revealing a sleek, modern tunnel, clean, lit with LED strips, a stark contrast to the decay around them. At its end stood a man, 60, with silver hair and a tailored suit, his presence chilling. Senator Richard Caldwell, his eyes cold, a pistol in hand. "You've been busy, Ramsey," he said, his voice smooth but venomous. "But you've opened a door you can't close." Jake's blood froze, the twist hitting like a shockwave. "Caldwell, he spat, stepping in front of Emma and Sophie, his hand on his holster. "You're here." "In Fairview?" Emma's voice rose, raw with rage. "You did this to me, to her." "You used my dad." Caldwell's smile was icy, his gun steady. "Henry was a patriot, Emma. He understood sacrifices for the greater good. Your memories, Subject 13's, they were collateral for national security." Sophie's voice cracked, defiant. "You're a monster! You hurt kids!" Shadow lunged, teeth bared, but Caldwell fired a warning shot into the floor, stopping the dog mid-stride. Jake grabbed Shadow's harness, his voice fierce. "You're done, Caldwell. The tapes, the files, they're going public." Caldwell's laugh was sharp, his eyes glinting. "You think I'd let you walk out? This town's mine. Coleman was a pawn, Bennett a fool." "You're just the latest to overreach." Emma's hands shook, her voice breaking. "Why me? Why her?" "What did we do to deserve this?" Caldwell's face softened, almost pitying. "You were perfect, Emma. Resilient, malleable. Silent Canvas wasn't just experiments. It was control, shaping minds for a new era. Ooh. You were proof it worked. Until now." Jake's mind raced, his father's cryptic warnings about DC puppet masters suddenly clear. "You're not untouchable," he said, his voice steady. "The sheriff's upstairs and Sophie's post is viral. The world's watching." Caldwell's smile faltered, but a new sound cut through, a low, mechanical click from the tunnel behind him. The LED lights flickered, and a second figure emerged. Laura Bennett, her navy blazer torn, her gray hair loose, her face etched with guilt, holding a flash drive. "I'm done hiding, Caldwell," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I copied the tapes. They're online now." The twist landed like a thunderbolt. Jake's eyes widened. "Laura, you turned?" Laura's voice cracked, tears streaming. "I couldn't let you die, Emma. I knew about the project, but not you, not the kids. I'm so sorry." Caldwell's face twisted, his gun swinging toward Laura, but Shadow seized the moment, tackling him, teeth sinking into his wrist. The pistol clattered, and Jake dove, pinning Caldwell to the ground, zip-tying his hands. "It's over," Jake growled, his arm throbbing but his resolve unbroken. Emma rushed to Laura, her voice raw. "Why didn't you tell me?" Laura's voice was a whisper, her eyes wet. "I thought silence kept us safe. I was wrong." Sophie clutched the flash drive, her voice fierce. "We did it, Ms. Sullivan. Shadow did it." The dog whined, limping back to Jake, his flank scratched but his eyes steady. Jake's chest heaved, the tapes and files secure, but Caldwell's final words chilled him. "You've exposed me, Ramsey. But Silent Canvas isn't just me." As deputies stormed the tunnel, Jake looked at Emma and Sophie, their faces lit with fragile hope. The truth was out, but Subject 13 was still a ghost, and Caldwell's network loomed larger than Fairview. Shadow's steady gaze anchored him, a promise that the fight wasn't over. The sleek, LED-lit tunnel beneath Fairview Middle School vibrated with the echo of deputies' boots, their flashlights slicing through the dark as they secured the chamber. Jake Ramsey, 34, stood over a zip-tied Senator Richard Caldwell, his short blonde hair damp with sweat, his police uniform bloodied from a grazed arm, his eyes burning with resolve. Shadow, the German shepherd, panted beside him, his black and tan coat matted, his bloodied paw steady, amber eyes locked on Caldwell, whose silver hair glinted under the harsh lights, his tailored suit torn from Shadow's attack. Emma Sullivan, 42, clutched the Subject 13 file, her auburn hair loose, her khaki blazer ripped, her face a mix of grief and fury after learning her father, Henry Walsh, had been complicit in Caldwell's experiments. Sophie Carter,
13 held a flash drive, her curly brown hair framing defiant eyes, her denim jacket slung over her shoulder. The uploaded tapes now viral, exposing Project Silent Canvas. The chamber's shattered monitors and childlike drawings stood as silent witnesses, the air thick with the weight of Laura Bennett's betrayal and redemption. She'd copied and leaked the tapes, turning against Caldwell. Jake's radio crackled with deputies' updates, but Caldwell's chilling words, "Silent Canvas isn't just me," rang in his ears. "You're done, Caldwell," Jake said, his voice rough but unwavering, tightening the zip ties. "The world knows now." Caldwell's laugh was cold, his eyes glinting. "You think a few tapes stop this? My network's bigger than Fairview, Ramsey." "You've only scratched the surface." Emma's voice shook, raw with pain. "You destroyed my life, Caldwell. My memories, my dad. Why?" Caldwell's gaze softened, almost mocking. "You were a masterpiece, Emma, a mind we could shape, control. Your father understood until he grew weak." Sophie stepped forward, her voice fierce. "You're the weak one, hiding behind kids and secrets," Shadow growled, his hackles rising, and Jake's hand rested on his holster, his voice sharp. "Save it for the feds, Caldwell." "You're not slithering out of this." But a sudden hum surged through the chamber, the LED lights flickering as a low rumble shook the walls. Deputies shouted, their radios crackling with static, and Shadow's barks turned frantic, his nose twitching toward a hidden panel in the tunnel wall. Jake's pulse spiked, his flashlight sweeping the panel, revealing a faint seam and a keypad, modern, out of place in the Cold War relic. "Another trap," he muttered, prying at it with his crowbar. Emma's voice was urgent, her eyes wide. "Jake, what if there's more down here? More kids like Subject 13? The panel popped open, exposing a small, locked case with a digital lock, its screen flashing. "Enter code or destroy." Sophie's voice trembled, clutching the flash drive. "It's a failsafe, isn't it? To wipe everything." Jake's mind raced, Caldwell's network looming larger than he'd feared. "We need that case," he said, turning to Caldwell, his voice fierce. "What's the code?" Caldwell's smile was smug, his voice low. "You'll never know, Ramsey. My legacy's safe." Before Jake could press further, a deputy shouted from the tunnel. "We've got movement. Someone's breaching the school." The twist hit like a shockwave. Caldwell wasn't alone. Jake's eyes snapped to Sophie, who gasped, her voice panicked. "They're coming for the files." Shadow lunged toward the tunnel, his growl savage, and Jake grabbed the case, his voice commanding. "Emma, Sophie, stick with me. We're getting out now." They sprinted through the tunnel, Shadow leading, his barks guiding them past deputies grappling with a sudden power surge. The school above was chaos, alarms blaring, lights flashing, parents and reporters crowding the halls drawn by Sophie's viral post. Jake's arm throbbed, but Shadow's relentless pace drove him forward. They burst into room 207, the torn painting a grim reminder, and Jake barricaded the door, his voice urgent. "Sophie, upload the last tape, now." Sophie's fingers flew across her phone, her voice trembling but defiant. "It's going live. Everyone's gonna see Caldwell's face." Emma's voice was raw, tears streaming as she clutched the Subject 13 file. "Jake, we can't let them erase her." "She's out there, I know it." Shadow whined, his nose pressed to the floor, and Jake's flashlight caught a glint. A hidden microchip, taped beneath a desk, pulsing faintly. "A tracker," Jake said, his blood running cold. "They've been monitoring us since Shadow tore the painting." The door rattled, heavy blows shaking it, and a new voice, cold, unfamiliar, came through. "Give us the case, Ramsey, or the school burns." Jake's heart pounded, but Shadow's growl was unrelenting, his body shielding Sophie. "We're not giving up," Jake said, his voice fierce, smashing the chip under his boot. He turned to Emma, his eyes steady. Your dad tried to protect you. Now it's our turn. For you. For Subject 13. For Fairview. As the door buckled, deputies stormed in from the hall, weapons drawn, overpowering the intruders. 2 men in black tactical gear, Caldwell's hired muscle. Jake handed the case to a deputy, his voice commanding, "Get this to the feds." "It's evidence." Sophie's phone pinged, her voice triumphant. "It's done. The tape's everywhere." Emma sank to her knees, sobbing, her voice a whisper. "We did it, Dad. You didn't win, but we will." Shadow pressed against her, his whine soft, his strength unbroken. Caldwell was down, but his network lingered, and Subject 13's fate hung in the balance. Jake's resolve hardened, the fight far from over, but Fairview was waking up, and Shadow's bark had lit the spark. The morning sun bathed Fairview Middle School in a soft golden glow, its quiet halls a stark contrast to the chaos of days past. Jake Ramsey, 34, stood outside room 207, his short blonde hair catching the light, his police uniform replaced by a simple navy jacket, his arms still bandaged from the underground showdown. Shadow, the German shepherd, lay at his feet, his black and tan coat freshly groomed, his bloodied paw healing, a medal of valor glinting on his collar. Emma Sullivan, 42, leaned against the wall, her auburn hair tied back, her khaki blazer swapped for a sweater, her face softer but marked by the weight of her reclaimed past. Sophie Carter, 13, stood beside her, her curly brown hair bouncing, her denim jacket slung over her shoulder, a sketch pad in hand with a drawing of Shadow titled "The Hero Who Remembered." The torn painting, once hiding a secret chamber, was gone, replaced by a mural of vibrant blues and greens, painted by Emma's students as a symbol of healing. Senator Richard Caldwell was in custody, his fentanyl empire exposed by the viral tapes Sophie uploaded, but his ominous warning, "Silent canvas isn't just me," lingered. The FBI had seized the files, confirming Emma as Subject 12, a child subjected to memory suppression experiments led by her father, Henry Walsh. The search for Subject 13, relocated to Southfield Orphanage, was ongoing, a faint hope driving Emma forward. Laura Bennett faced charges, her betrayal softened by her last-minute redemption, while Agent Sarah Coleman's role remained under investigation. Jake's radio was silent now, but the school buzzed with a new energy. Parents, teachers, and students gathered for a ceremony honoring Shadow. Emma's voice was steady as she addressed the crowd, her eyes bright. This school was built on secrets, but Shadow tore them down. He gave me back my truth, and we owe him everything. Sophie stepped forward, her voice clear, holding up her drawing. Shadow's not just a dog. He's our guardian. He showed us what courage looks like. The crowd applauded, and Shadow's tail thumped, his amber eyes calm but watchful. Inside, Emma had transformed room 207 into an art therapy space, its walls lined with student paintings, expressions of pain, hope, and resilience. She handed Jake a small canvas, a swirl of blues with a dog silhouette. "For you," she said, her voice soft, "for believing in me." Jake's throat tightened, his own father's unresolved military past a quiet ache. "You're the one who kept going, Emma. You and Sophie." Sophie grinned, her voice teasing. "Don't forget Shadow. He's the real boss." But a final twist waited. As the ceremony ended, a woman approached, 40, with dark curls and a hesitant smile, her coat worn but clean. She carried a faded photo, Henry Walsh with 2 girls, one Emma, the other her spitting image. "I'm Lily," she said, her voice trembling. "I think I'm Subject 13. Emma's breath caught, tears spilling as she clutched the photo. "You're alive," she whispered, pulling Lily into a hug.
I thought I'd lost you. Lily's voice broke, her eyes wet. I saw the news, your tapes. A dog led me back. A border collie, Finn.
He's outside. Jake's heart raced, his gaze snapping to the school's lawn where a black and white border collie stood, eerily like the one in Emma's dreams. Finn, he said, his voice low, remembering the journal's note. The dog remembered. Shadow whined, trotting to Finn, their noses touching in a silent salute. Sophie's voice was awed. They knew, Jake. The dogs always knew. The crowd hushed, sensing the moment's weight. Emma's voice was fierce, addressing Lily and the gathered townsfolk. We're not just survivors. We're family now because of Shadow, because of truth. Jake nodded, his hand on Shadow's head, his voice steady. Fairview's not hiding anymore. We're rebuilding. For you, for Lily, for every kid they tried to erase. Weeks later, Fairview dedicated Shadow's Sanctuary, a community center where Room 207 once stood, its walls a gallery of healing art. Emma and Lily led workshops, Sophie their eager apprentice. Jake trained new canine units, Shadow at his side, a symbol of unbreakable loyalty. But late at night, Jake checked his email, finding an anonymous message. Silent Canvas lives. Find Southfield's last tape. His pulse quickened, the fight not over. But Shadow's steady gaze promised they'd face it together. To you watching, Shadow's story isn't just about a dog. It's about courage, truth, and the bonds that outlast secrets. Share your story of a loyal pet in the comments. What's the moment they showed you what matters? Subscribe to Pawprints of Hope. Join our community, and let's keep telling stories like Shadow's, stories that prove heroes bark louder than lies.